So after binging this game for over 16 hours, I think I'm ready to go ahead and review this game. But before we start, I do have a disclaimer. That disclaimer is that I didn't buy this game with my own money. It was a gift to me from my friend Tengu230. So while I will be giving you my opinion on if I find the game worth its price tag, I will freely admit that I got this game for free. Lastly, before I begin, I really recommend that you give Tengu a look if you haven't. A link to his channel will be in the description below. And Tengu, if you're watching this, thank you for the game and congrats on your new job with the Button Smashers. Now let's begin the review of Pyre. Pyre is the third game to come from Supergiant Games, and it's available on PC and PS4 for $20. Now I'd say that right out of the gate, Supergiant's amazing art style and sound design that they're known for is more apparent than ever in Pyre. This game is downright beautiful from an artistic standpoint, and while I will admit that this game does sport the same art style from both Bastion and Transistor, i.e. Supergiant's last two games, I can definitely see it taking way more of a medieval fantasy look this time around, with its beautiful arena levels, characters, and environmental backdrops. Plus, the graphical effects and animations here on display are great and run extremely smoothly, whether it's light shimmering off the Book of Rites, or the smooth and graceful movement of the black wagon across the downside. It's all there, and stunning. And then when you add the sound design, oh my, it just gets all the more perfect. I honestly couldn't help myself from sitting still in-game and listening to the strong vocal ballads and instrumentals as they played.
Before the salt and roiling sea, the moon began to cry. The valley ran with sorrowful tears and filled the waters high. The misty morning over the brine belies a leaden sky. The stars all hide away from the chill until the evening rise.
I'd say the last thing to add on to the sound design would be the strong voice acting that, while minimal, does more than just getting the job done. It all honestly adds up to be a great 16 to 17 hour journey that only has one error or two along the way. And that error for me is that I did have 2 times where I got noticeable frame rate drops in the middle of combat. But beyond that, I didn't have any other real issues and it ran fine on ultra settings on my PC. So Pyre definitely gets an A+ for production in my book. Now let's ride on over to the gameplay. Let's start with the single player. Immediately I took note of how much bigger in scope this game is from Supergiant's last 2 games. Because while Bastion and Transistor were linear adventure games, Pyre is a different beast entirely. This is due to Pyre being made up of both arena battles and metagame time management mechanics. I'll go over the basic metagame stuff first as it makes up a lot of the single player content. The single player will have you building up a band of exiles to compete in the rites for freedom from the downside. But when you start the game, you only have 3 exiles to start with as you journey across the downside, but as you get further into the game, you will recruit more exiles into your band to fight in the rites. So you're gonna have to manage out how much work you put into each exile to have any realistic hope of freeing most of your group. To do this, you have to choose which exiles fight in the rites with what gear, what paths to take through the downside based off of your fellow exiles' recommendations, and what you choose to do in your reader's free time, whether it's looking for supplies, studying up on the rites to increase overall team stats, or giving one of your exiles a personal session to grant them extra EXP. Along with that, you can also compete in practice trials to get the best talismans for your group, and use practice mode to perfect your group's strategies. I'd have to say, overall, I like this system a lot because it helped to make the game feel like a real journey. My only real gripe with the metagame systems in place is that your last 2 exiles come in rather late into the game and it's a little hard to play catch up with them. Next up would be the arena battles with the exiles known as rites in the game. Now, the main goal of a right is to use your team of 3 exiles against another team of 3 exiles and extinguish the other team's pyre. You do this by running the game orb into the pyre or by throwing it in with an exile. But be warned that if you do throw in an orb, that exile is banished for 1 round, leaving your team outnumbered for the next round. So you have to decide if you want to do more damage or keep a full team for the next round. You can also banish exiles by attacking one another offensively or defensively, but the main goal is to extinguish your opponent's pyre, and the first one to do so wins. On top of that, different exiles move differently and attack differently. For example, a demon exile moves very slowly, but can attack more effectively and does a lot more damage than the other exiles do, while a cur will move really fast but have the smallest attack and do the least amount of damage to a pyre. So the rights make for extremely fun arena battles that require a lot of on-the-fly strategy. I also like that if you lose a right, it can change the story as well, whether it's just a character getting upset with you or you failing to free an exile, it really carries weight. But that kinda goes out the window with you being able to restart rights in the single player, and it sits as a negative for me. I would rather it be set in stone rather than just allowing you to restart whenever you're about to lose. Then if you want even more rights than what's on offer in the single player, you have local multiplayer that you can play with a friend or a computer, which will most definitely fill that craving. This mode will allow you the ability to play as any faction or any character on any stage. But beyond that, the multiplayer is identical to the rights in the single player. Now lastly, we have the story. Here is the spoiler-free version of the plot. In the world of Pyre, you are an exiled citizen of the Commonwealth, which is a nation that formed up from the ashes of a fallen empire. But when a citizen of the Commonwealth is found guilty of a crime, they aren't thrown in jail or simply executed, they are branded in exile and banished to live out the rest of their days in the downside, which is meant to be a punishing and unforgiving purgatory till you leave the living world. And this is where your story begins. You begin as an unnamed girl who's about to die in the downside after being exiled for the heinous crime of simply knowing how to read. But instead of dying, you are found by 3 other fellow exiles. You get taken in by them and you learn about a series of trials known as the rights that may allow you to escape the downside so long as you prevail against the other bands of exiles that are taking part in them, to which they appoint you as their reader shortly after, with your goal being to escape the downside and get back to the Commonwealth for reasons that I won't spoil. Now before I delve further into the story, I need to point out that this game takes the visual novel route for storytelling, which means around 95% of the storytelling and dialogue is done with text blocks that you have to read. So if you don't like reading a lot in video games, this may not be the package you're looking for and may want to consider skipping this. But me personally, I don't mind it, and I thought it fit rather well with the universe of the game itself. Now on to my viewpoint of the story. I personally love the story along with its world and lovable characters. Each place you visit in the downside has its own unique look and feel. The game does this by having each region of the downside look completely different, adding a whole bunch of lore with the people there from the Commonwealth. And heck, by the end of the game, the downside and Commonwealth felt like characters in of themselves. And speaking of characters, all of the characters in this game play off one another extremely well and have blooming personalities. Some of my favorite characters were Hedwyn with his infectious optimism, Jodariel, who carries a calm attitude through most situations, and Pamitha with her ego-jabbing sense of humor, just to list a few. Moving along, I want to cover the choice system, because at almost every point you are required to make a choice that will affect the story. Now, some choices will affect the story more than others, but I'd say the choices that will affect the story the most are the dialogue choices and event choices that you make. So do keep in mind that the choices you make and how well you do or don't do will heavily affect the story and the ending you get. Overall, I have to say that I love the story presented here with its amazing lore, characters, writing, and choice system. And in concluding this review, Pyre is one of the best games I've played this year and is worth every nickel of the $20 price tag. Its beautiful art style, amazing soundtrack, complex story, and solid gameplay makes me wish that I just had time to play it all over again. So I'm going to give Pyre a 9 out of 10 with a heavy recommendation. And while I will admit that this game does have some problems such as having a couple really late join up team members and allowing you to restart rights in the single player, they are really small issues that don't take a lot from the overall enjoyment of the game.